Hi, thank you for tuning in to the Short Stacks. I'm Lisa Quintero, young adult librarian.
And I am Nick Barron, patron and sometimes volunteer.
This is a show where we talk to you about what we've been reading, watching, or listening to. So Nick, go ahead.
So, last episode we talked about camping, and our camping adventure took place.
Uh-huh.
What are your thoughts?
I really enjoyed it, and I cannot wait to do it again. Yeah, it was really interesting because it was a little bit different than I thought it was going to be, but overall, I really enjoyed it. I thought we were going to be spaced out a bit more from other people, and we were the first night, but then the second night was a weekend day, and so there were a lot more people there. But I still enjoyed it. It was cool sleeping underneath the stars, and it was nice out, so we got to sleep with our tent. We have a tent that has like mesh inside, and then you can put the rain fly over it. But since it wasn't raining, we didn't put the rain fly over it, so we were able to fall asleep looking up at the stars, which was pretty cool. Yeah,
it was very cool. And at the same time, we got to listen to somebody grunting like Tim Allen over in the next camp over.
Yeah, that guy was kind of annoying. But yeah, I really enjoyed, swimming in the lakes. We went to Kettle Moraine and we swam in Long Lake, which is where we camped, and we swam in Mothy Lake, which, we tried biking to one day, but Nick's tire popped, and so we ended up having to turn around and head back to Long Lake. So the second day we drove over to Mothy Lake and swam, and I love swimming, so that was like the highlight of the trip for me. I think the worst part of it was the mosquitoes.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I concur with all of those things. I also, because I had never camped where there was, I shouldn't say never. When I was really little, the first time we went camping, we were at like a campground and there were lots of people. But in my adult life camping, it was always just me and a bunch of guys in the woods. And so there wasn't like all of the chatter from all of the other campsites. This was a bit more isolated, even though it probably the times that we went camping, we were probably closer to civilization. Air quotes on a podcast. But yeah, so. But even though we were closer to civilization in those other times, it was just me and a couple of guys, and so you didn't have all the chatter coming from all the and. A lot of people are there to party down, and so even though it's nice to at times enjoy in the frivolity of others because of the fact that like everybody's been so isolated, at the same time I was looking for a little bit of that solitary camping experience. So, but I
was looking for.
Yeah, but I still had a great time, and you managed to get me to go into the waters. They were not as frigid as Lake Michigan, so I actually submerged myself as opposed to standing waist deep and shivering.
Like when we go to Atwater Beach.
Yes. I'm sure some of our listeners are familiar with Atwater Beach.
Yes, and it can get pretty cold, but yeah, the water was comfortable. Yeah, I was surprised by how many mosquito bites I got because we used bug spray with DEET in it, but it still didn't, work that great. But overall, I really enjoyed myself. I learned how to make a campfire, so that was pretty exciting. There were a lot of firsts for me on this trip, so I'm really, really glad that we did it, and I can't wait to do it again.
Yep, very good. I had a great time. So let's jump to library news.
So yeah, what we've got going on right now is that the summer reading program has ended. It ended as of August 15th. The children's program winners have been announced, the raffle winners. And so if you won your raffle, you should come pick up your prizes at the information desk. And the teen raffle winners, I just picked yesterday because we just came back from vacation. And I will be contacting all of you this weekend, and you will be able to pick up your prizes as well. So for the teen raffle winners, they get like a gift card and they get to pick a book. And then for the children's raffle winners, they get a bag full of some fun goodies like bubbles and things like that. So
yay,
bubble wand. Yeah. Some good things to do outside and some other activities. Yeah. So that is always the signal that school's about to start for us because summer reading is officially over.
Yep.
And so that means that we are actually going to be changing our hours a little bit in September. Stay tuned for more information on that on our website and our social media channels. We're going to be expanding our hours a little bit now that we have, entered the next phase of reopening. It sounds like we will probably still be closed on Sundays until the end of the year, but otherwise our hours are going to be a little bit longer during the weekdays. Keep an eye out for that if you have been having trouble getting here at the times that we've been open now, because the hours will be a little bit longer.
From the stacks.
So this week we're doing a segment that's a little bit different. It was actually Nick's idea that we do something called Literally Inspired. And so Literally Inspired is a segment from the stacks that will cover TV shows, music, or movies that have been inspired by actual books.
Yep.
And so on a recent trip to visit Nick's parents, we listened to Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale on CD, and we had watched the show on Hulu. We've watched, the first 3 seasons? Is that what's out right now? But yeah, so we've watched whatever's out right now. And yeah, I had read the book previous to watching the show, but Nick had never read it. So what were your thoughts, Nick?
Well, so it actually the show and the books do have a good strong level of overlap in terms of, or the book and the show have a good strong level of overlap. They don't deviate too much from the storyline, make it a little more modern based upon what society is like now, since the book was written in 86.
In the 80s.
Yeah. So there was some slight adaptions there, but and of course the fact that they gave June a name in the show as opposed to the books, because June.
Yeah, in the book she's just of Fred. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a very deliberate choice in the books, because she's saving that bit of herself for herself. But like I was thinking about it this morning as I was walking the dogs, and I was like, yeah, it's like if they wrote a screenplay, particularly for multiple seasons, trying to carry out a screenplay without actually ever saying her true name
that'd be hard.
Yeah. So yeah, it'd be a lot of "Hey you." So yeah, it made sense that they named her June. But yeah, I really enjoyed the books after or the book. Keep saying books. I really enjoyed the book after seeing the show. But one of the things that I'm really into world building, and I'm really into dystopias. The idea of dystopian worlds. And one of the things in the show that I really enjoyed was the colonies. And in the books, it was fascinating for me as somebody that was born in the 70s and grew up in the 80s. I remember so vividly 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl and the nuclear threat, the fear of nuclear war, constant talk of radiation in music and fiction. I listen to a lot of punk rock and metal, so lots of references to radiation, nuclear war, etc. And so, in the books, do it every time. In the book, you can feel much more when Margaret Atwood talks about the colonies, the wording, and you can feel that pervasive threat that everybody else felt in the Reagan era. And to me, that was one of the most marked differences in how I feel things were portrayed in the show versus how they were depicted in the book.
I think in the show they that we lack that context now because
Yeah.
it's not, things didn't turn out the way that we thought they would. It's like pollution is bad, obviously, and global warming is terrible, but we don't have a lot of things happening like rivers catching fire and things like that as much as we used to because, the EPA and changes in policy over the years. So yeah, it was interesting listening to it again because I first read the book over a decade ago, and it was interesting listening to it again after having watched the show. And I remember the first time reading it, thinking of the colonies, and even though I was born in the early '80s, I also had a little bit of that context in terms of what I pictured the colonies as being, and what the colonies actually looked like on the show was very different than what I pictured them as being. But yeah, I enjoyed listening to the book again. There were certain things that I had forgotten, like the Serena Joy is described very differently in the book than she is on the show.
Yes.
On the show, she's a young woman and she is very intelligent and is somebody who wrote books and kind of helped this whole society form. Whereas in the book, she's more like this older woman who was like a televangelist's wife, and she was in the choir of this televangelist show. And so even though she had a little bit of a hand in making this world, it's not as pronounced as on the show, which I think I like better on the show, that she's more involved with the creation of it. And that this is, because we see more on the show that she's involved with the creation of it, and that how it has hurt her because she, had such a prominent role. And then the societal rules of Gilead have made it so that she is no longer as important or has as much of a voice as she did before Gilead became a thing.
Yeah, you get the sense that she took her own voice away, and she, because that's one of the things that I think when it was written in the '80s, Margaret Atwood was writing it from the context of the '80s, and women in a sense of like corporate power or having a bold voice wasn't as prevalent, and so putting her in the choir and making her kind of a televangelist type star fit into that context, whereas in the show, making her this very kind of like prominent and powerful woman that people looked up to, and went to her book signings and went to her speaking engagements, and she was this woman of prominence, and her ideas ultimately undermining that and stripping that away from her. I thought that was a really good modern take.
It was interesting too because I had forgotten that Moira was a character in the book, and that Moira was actually queer in the book, just like she is on the show. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that was pretty, progressive for a book written in the '80s.
Absolutely.
Even though there's, some stuff that's mentioned in there that's kind of very '80s about, her, Moira coming out of Fred, and of Fred being like weird with her for a while because she's like, "Do you like me that way?" And then Moira's like, "I don't like you that way," and then they're fine again. And I feel like that's not as much of a thing nowadays because people, I think, understand things a bit better than they used to.
Yeah, it's not an assumption now.
Yeah, it's not an assumption that if you're gay, you automatically like all women or automatically like all men. But back then, it kind of was. So yeah, I thought that was interesting, but the description of Moira in the book, it reminded me of that actress from that show Russian Doll, and I'm trying to remember her name because she has curly red hair, and she's very like independent and involved with all these women's groups and very brash. And so yeah, I enjoyed that description of her, but I also enjoyed the Moira from the show, and I enjoyed that. I really liked that in the show they made Moira a person of color. And that the show has a bit more diversity in terms of who makes up this world. It was interesting because in the book it almost seemed Natasha Lyonne, that's the actress that I pictured, but in the book it seemed almost like it was this society that was putting white folks over everyone else, which is part of the Gilead thing. Whereas on the show, because it has more diversity, it doesn't come off as like much of a white supremacist society. But yeah, I really like the Moira character on the show. On the show, they have I can't remember what the actress's name is, but I really enjoy her acting. And yeah, I like the storyline on the show for Moira a bit more because I feel like in the book, Moira's storyline is a bit more sad because she kind of just has her spirit and her will to be who she is taken away from her. Whereas in the show, spoiler alert, in the show, Moira ends up running away and getting out of Gilead, which I really like because I feel like that is something that would happen, that some people would get out and some people would stay. But I also like in the book because I think that is also true. I think that if somebody like that were to stay, it could very well happen that they would lose their spirit and just kind of wait until their final days, by doing a lot of drugs and just kind of being.
Yeah. From the standpoint of a standalone book, it did make sense to write Moira in that way and convey that feeling in the sense of, building attachment to characters in a series and maintaining that series. It makes sense that they depicted Moira the way they did. And Moira is one of my favorites. So yeah. I like how they depicted Moira in the show.
It was interesting because in the show they cover a lot more, and we talked about this a bit, you and I, in the car ride while we were listening to the book. They cover a lot more of June's relationship with her daughter Hannah, and Hannah is a big driving force for June to do the things that she wants to do. Whereas in the book, once of Fred's daughter's taken away from her, we don't really hear much about her. Fred talks about Luke, her husband, and and how they got together and everything, and how she wonders about him and where he is, and in the book it's kind of indicated that he is probably dead. But in the show, we see stuff about Luke, but we also see a lot about Hannah, and Hannah's kind of what keeps her going, and Hannah's part of what makes her do things that she might not have normally done because she wants to see Hannah or keep Hannah safe, because Serena Joy's threatening to do things, or to not let her Serena Joy is like, I know where Hannah is, I can take you to her. And so Serena Joy uses Hannah to manipulate June a lot. And
from a screen writing standpoint, like it gave June her power and her drive. In the book, she really kind of she's more meek and just kind of flounders around a bit. And in the show, she's in a situation that's beating her down, but she's still got that spirit that is driving her, and a lot of that comes from the development that they did with the storyline of Hannah. And I think for a series, it made sense, and also from a modern standpoint, because I think that we in the 80s, it from the standpoint of a standalone dystopian novel, having her be a bit more oppressed and broken of spirit seemed a bit more fitting for the time. But I think in what we want to see now, I think it makes more sense for her to be a driven and strong and powerful woman.
Yeah, no, I like both a lot. Both have their interesting merits, and both imagine the world in interesting ways. I like what the writers of the show have done to keep the story going, and how they've changed things, and how they've kind of teased out the relationships that women would have with each other in these circumstances. Very, very transactional and manipulative type of relationships. But when you think about human, like how humans are, human behavior, it makes sense that in such a situation where it's you versus me and in a survival kind of situation that sort of stuff would happen.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about how the book ends versus how season 1 kind of wraps up, if you can remember, because I don't fully remember. And also let's talk about how Testaments deviates.
So I don't really remember how season 1 wraps up either. Let me take a look and see if I can find that. So the book ends kind of abruptly. The book ends when of Fred, who is pregnant with the driver Nick's baby. Spoiler alert. When the eyes take her away, and we are led to believe that Nick is an eye, and that the eyes are taking her away in order to help her, have this baby and potentially get her out of Gilead, but we don't know for sure. And in the book, it's interesting because in the book, I feel like there's a lot more talk of the commanders in terms of their politics, and they're not really fleshed out as characters, whereas in the show they're fleshed out as characters. And at the end of season 1 of the show, I think it ends a little bit before the eyes taking June away. Because the eyes don't take June away until later. I think the end of season 1, if I recall correctly, is June tries to go see Hannah, maybe? She gets in trouble with Aunt Lydia. I remember her getting in trouble with Aunt Lydia, and Aunt Lydia basically tells her that she's going to pay for her rebellion. And so I don't remember if it's because she went to see Hannah or if it's because Aunt Lydia knows that she's pregnant with Nick's baby. It's been so long since we've watched it.
We are disseminating false information.
Okay, yeah. So season 1 ends when she finds out that she's pregnant with Nick. And
With
yeah,
Nick.
yeah, and then that's when Serena Joy brings her to see Hannah, and she tells her that if June, and if anything happens to the baby, she'll hurt Hannah, and so it ends with an act of resistance from June, which I will not spoil. And that's when Aunt Lydia is like, you're going to pay for your rebellion.
Indeed.
So yeah, so that's the end of the show versus the end of the
end of season 1 of the show.
Yeah, the end of season 1 of the show versus the end of the book. So then the book, it just kind of is like this final thing, and we're kind of it's left to our imagination whether June, gets out of Gilead, or whether, she gets stopped along the way, or whether the eyes are actually going to help her, or because in the book, one of the things that's interesting in the book that you also see in the show is that, there's a lot of corruption in this society, and a lot of people getting away with things that they shouldn't be able to get away with, and, all these things that the society in Gilead is supposed to be against are still happening within the walls of Gilead, just in different ways. Like, the hotel is a brothel, even though Gilead's supposed to be against, premarital sex and sex for pleasure and things like that. It's this, they're still, trafficking women and doing things that they claim are,
it's a society built on
are sinful. Yes, it is a society built on hypocrisy. And so yes, about the Testaments. So the Testaments is a book that Margaret Atwood wrote that came out this past year. And it is kind of the sequel to The Handmaid's Tale. And it kind of picks up where a bit of the show, and then also picks up a bit of the book. So in the show, we find out that Hannah's name is changed to Agnes, and the baby that...
Yeah, you should explain that Hannah is the baby.
Hannah's June's daughter, or of Fred. And so in the show, Hannah's name is changed to Agnes, and she, when we last see her in the end of season 3, she's probably like 12. And then in the show also, when of Fred or June has her baby that's Nick's baby, she names her Nicole. And in the show, she gets Nicole out of Gilead and up into Canada. And so the Testaments follows the story of baby Nicole, who is now a teenager. She's 16. It follows the story of Agnes, who is in her early 20s. And it follows the story of Aunt Lydia, who is in the show and in the book one of the people who put together this society, and the way that the things work for the women in the show and in the book. And so it's interesting because
she was partially responsible for the aunts and the Marthas and all of that, correct?
Yeah, for like breaking down the women's society as it is. So like the handmaids having their, the things that the handmaids have to do, and for, she has a very tight relationship with Commander Judd. And it's interesting. So I had forgotten this. At the end of the book, there's like all these like documents that are shared, because at the end of the book, The Handmaid's Tale, the first book, at the end of the book, it's kind of like being told as though it's being told from a future society where they studied this ancient society, and they have these random documents, and they're talking about this failed society called Gilead, and laughing about it and kind of making jokes about it, but also sharing like a journal that they find that she put together. And she basically, of Fred, they find all these cassette tapes, and she recorded all of her story on these cassette tapes. And so they speculate as to how she recorded it and why she recorded it and who she was and who she was tied to. And they end up, deciding that she was either tied to, based on records that they have, to Commander Judd or Commander Waterford. And both Commander Judd and Commander Waterford were instrumental in the creation of the society. So Commander Judd was more the person who started the war and was more involved with how people were tortured and how people were punished and things like that, whereas Commander Waterford was more involved with policy. And so we don't know which commander of Fred was married to, or not married to, which commander held her as their handmaid. And so the second book, The Testaments, covers a lot of information about Commander Judd. And Commander Judd on the show, I think, is the older commander that we see later on, whose wife is ill. And that is where June starts to record her story in the basement on the cassette tapes. And Commander Waterford on the show is the first commander that June is living with, Serena Joy's husband. And I don't remember if on the show that second commander's name is Commander Judd. He's described very differently in the Testaments in the book. He is described as an older man, but he's described as a older man who likes to marry a lot of young girls and constantly is cycling through wives. And
which he's nothing like that in the
show. No. So it's interesting because some of the characters from the show are in the second book in the Testaments, but they are different. Aunt Lydia is pretty much the same throughout most things. Her backstory is a bit different in the book The Testaments, because in the show she's supposed to be a teacher in her previous life who had a lot of ideas about bad moms and things like that. Whereas in the show, or in the book The Testaments, she's supposed to be a judge who was a judge for a lot of domestic violence cases and cases involving women. And at one point she had been a teacher, but she doesn't have the kind of ideas that Aunt Lydia does in the show. It's in the book, she's portrayed more as, this woman who is very intelligent and figured out a way for herself to survive and to thrive in this new society. And kind of, even though she's not proud of it, she did what she feels like she did what she had to. And
I looked it up. It was Commander Lawrence that.
Commander Lawrence is the older commander.
Older commander that she recorded in the basement. So is it supposed to be Commander Judd, or is it just like some separate concoction that was specifically for the series?
Yeah.
We don't know.
we don't know, and it's like, and is Commander Judd, because we don't know from the original book, like, we don't know whether she was married to Commander Judd, or not married, but whether she was his handmaid or whether she was Commander Waterford's handmaid. So yeah, it's interesting because it ties everything together, but it's not exactly the same. The world building is the same. It's still dark dystopia. It's several years into the future, so probably like a decade into the future. We don't know what happened of Fred or June, but it follows. So yeah, it follows the story, like I said, of Agnes, who eventually becomes an aunt. It follows the story of Aunt Lydia, and it follows the story of baby Nicole, who is a teenager. And so baby Nicole is a teenager who is grown up in Canada in hiding and is being sent by this group called Mayday, which helped handmaids get out of Gilead. She's being sent back to Gilead in order to get information from Gilead to, help them bring Gilead down. And yeah, I'm about halfway through it right now, and it's really good. I like it a lot. I'm really excited for the next season of the show. Sounds like that probably won't be coming out until next year on Hulu because of, production having to stop because of COVID this year. But yeah, if you are interested, we own both books on audio here at the Shorewood Library. We also own both books on, in hardcover format here as well. And we also have the DVDs for the first few seasons of The Handmaid's Tale if you want to do your own comparison of the literary versus, the reimagined world of Margaret Atwood.
Yeah, and I'm really curious if they will steer it towards the Testaments and some of the storyline, or if they will continue to deviate out. The other thing that I wanted to throw in is something that. So in episode 1 of the Shorewood Stacks, we talked about Utopia for Realists by Rutger Bregman. And in episode 2, we talked about Noah's Not Enough by Naomi Klein. And one of the things that I thought was an interesting thing that both authors talked about in some way, shape, or form that relates to some of the feelings that I had while listening to The Handmaid's Tale is that they both talked about, our preoccupation with dystopias, which I love dystopias. I love my preoccupation with dystopias, but it's also because I like the sense of warning that comes from dystopias. This is what our world could be like if we don't stop it. Whereas both Rutger Bregman and Naomi Klein talked about the idea of we need to start talking about in books and media about how we can make the world a better place and talk about utopias and what we can be striving towards as a society, as opposed to what we are racing towards as a society out of fear and what have you. And I thought it was an interesting note and made me think about that. So if you're curious about those concepts, go check out episodes 1 and 2 of the Shorewood Stacks.
Yeah, that is really interesting because it's like, we do use fiction a lot to process our lives and our world, and why not think of what could be rather in terms of like the positive rather than what could be in terms of like this is doom and gloom and the world is going to end. Yeah. We do have a fascination. I mean, I remember being a kid and being really into watching those Nostradamus videos and things like that. I don't know why as humans we have this fascination with the end of the world and our mortality and the destruction of our planet. I think, and we do need to think in terms like, like a lot of young activists, like about what the world could be like and how we can get there and take positive steps rather than, being a reactionary society that is taking steps to stop bad things from happening. Yeah.
We need a little optimism.
Yes, a little optimism is good. As always, thank you for listening to the Short Stacks. You can find us on Spotify, Podbean, or iTunes. If you have any questions or comments for our host, email us at shorewoodstacks@gmail.com, or you can contact us via our social media channels. We are on Twitter and we are on Facebook. Until next time, thanks for listening and be well.